Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Interviews with Disciples and Devotees. Today, we are honored to have Bem with us to tell us a bit about her life and her work. Namaste, Bem. How did you first hear about Mother and Sri Aurobindo and Oroville?
So I have an Indian mother, Punjabi Indian mother, and of course an Indian grandmother, my nani, my mother's mother. And she had a beautiful house in Delhi, and she had a library. She had a library of spiritual books, and the prize collection was this whole library of Sri Aurobindo's work. So I was a child. I used to go to India every school holidays from England.
You were living where in England?
So I was born in Calcutta, and my parents went back to England. My father was British, and we went back to England in 1968, and I was there, but came home, had this very strong connection to India. I mean, India is such a spiritual home for me. It's also my birth country, and it was where my grandmother lived and my grandfather lived, and we used to go and visit regularly. And she had this collection of books, and I used to raid them and read them late into the night on my school holidays. And my mother, too, was very interested in meeting the mother. She went to Cambridge University, and on her first return after one year in overseas as a young woman, she said, I'm only coming home if you take me to the ashram, and I want to meet Mother. And so she was taken down to Pondicherry by my grandparents, and that's when they first met the mother. And so that's a long connection, but to cut a long story short, when I was 25, I left England, and I decided that it probably wasn't going to be the home that I live in for the rest of my life. And ostensibly, I was doing a gap year in Australia. And on my way to Australia, I knew I was going through a major change in my life, potentially changing the country of my residence, and everything did change in my life. But on my way to Australia on that trip, my grandmother sent me down to Pondicherry and to Oroville. And she sent me to meet I guess a family member, Asta Patel, and to stay in Oroville and in Pondi too. So I arrived first time in Oroville when there was hardly anything there, but an incredible feeling and an incredible ambition and vision and sense of spirit.
What year was it?
That was 1989.
89.
That I first came down here. I was 25 years old. Yeah.
But you met Mother?
I didn't meet her.
You didn't, but your grandparents met
My
her.
grandparents and my mother did.
And your mother
yes.
did.
And so that was the influence, and that's why my grandmother sent me down here. So I came to Oroville, and I tried to find out as much as I could about it, because I was absolutely enchanted by the vision of a different life and a different world. And I was going through this big transition myself where I wanted a different life and a different world. I had the most extraordinary meditation in the ashram on one of those meditation days, and then another extraordinary meditation on top of a concrete spiral staircase, which was later to become the Matrimandir. So it was very underdeveloped. I think there was one guest house, Central Guest House, and I stayed in Central Guest House that time as well. And I met lots of early Aurovillians, people who were young, my age, as well as some travelers. And we decided to go and meditate at the top of this concrete staircase, which I heard all of these stories about us. And I heard the vision for what it was going to be, Mother's vision of a meditation chamber with 12 white columns and a white chamber and the world's largest crystal ball and a oculus and this light coming down that would be refracted across this chamber, and my imagination went off. I'm a novelist. People tell me stories, I can imagine all kinds of things. And so I had an incredible idea of what it would be, and people were saying to me, we're going to invent it, we just don't know what skin it's going to have yet. What's going to be on the outside? We're still designing it up and it hasn't come to us yet. So I didn't know it was going to be this golden globe. I just was on this staircase, and apparently I was told, well, this is the aspiring consciousness. Well, it was just concrete staircase back then, but I had this sense of an aspiring consciousness, for myself, and also for that place that I was in, which was dusty and red with just a few trees, and maybe that beautiful banyan tree in its kind of earlier days, I guess, not as grand, very modest place, but hearing the stories of the people who'd arrived there and their vision for Oroville really inspired me. So I go to Australia, and I always promise myself that I'm going to come back to Oroville. But it takes me quite a long time, till 2017. I'm a university associate professor by then. I'm running a degree called the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. I've become a novelist. I've married an Australian and had 3 children, 3 sons who've all come here.
Oh, they've all come here.
Yes, and they're here now as we speak, a couple of them. So I was there really actually creating what I describe as a curriculum for being. So I've had a 33-year meditation practice where I've been meditating probably about an hour a day. So a very big focus on consciousness. And so I took a lot of that into this whole idea of consciousness-based education. And I ended up running a transdisciplinary degree, a world-first, multi-award-winning, very future-facing degree called the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. And I founded that at the University of Technology in Sydney. Now, one thing about transdisciplinary learning is this. We have students from law, from health, from design, communications, business, engineering, IT, science, from 26 different disciplines. And I cannot teach the depth of any of those disciplines. So the only thing I can teach is not the curriculum for knowing, but a curriculum for being. So how do you develop the learner? In this kind of work, in transdisciplinary work, there are many disciplines, but there is one knower. This is an Upanishadic idea, actually, that there are many, many knowledges, but only one knower. So I decided to lead a curriculum that was focused on the knower. And that's how I see transformative education. Because transformative education isn't about filling your head up with facts that people can forget, about knowledge that is changing more rapidly than we understand or know, and also developing students for unknown futures which we haven't yet imagined, and hopefully better worlds. So to have a curriculum for the past based on knowledge that is in the past, rather than creating people who can not just be consumers of knowledge, but producers as well, and producers of a new way of thinking in a new world, became my vision. And it was very inspired by my history, my interest in meditation, in developing of this consciousness and awareness, and a kind of higher calling, if you like, of learning this curriculum for being, and that's what I describe it as. So when it came to 2017 and I got the chance to have a sabbatical, I knew that I would have to come to Oroville to do it. And I wrote to Asta saying, I came back in 1989 and it's been many years, but I have to come back to Oroville and I'd love to come and do my sabbatical there. I knew I didn't want to come to Oroville just for a few days or a week. I needed to spend some time there to really understand it. So I came on a sabbatical in 2017 and I wrote much of my latest novel there, called Elephants with Headlights, which is a very future-thinking novel about where we're going with our ancient traditions and what we can take into this great future with us from this deep past in India that has been rich with spirit and this notion of Brahman. So the idea of unity is in every single piece of work of mine, including my teaching. Unity between disciplines, unity between people. And this novel, Elephants with Headlights, was also about the future and how we find unity. So coming to Oroville to write it, for the first time in a long time, so remember last time I was in Oroville, I meditated on top of a concrete staircase. This time I returned and there's a golden globe where I had that experience. And I rushed up to the golden globe, so excited to see what was inside and what could have been imagined. And I was totally awestruck with Matra Mandir. I walked up the stairs, beautifully carpeted, white carpet now, no longer concrete, bare concrete, past the place where I sat, and then opened the door, and I couldn't walk in. It was too intense an experience because it had lived in my imagination. And I was absolutely aghast. I was breathless. I had to close the door and sit down for a little while and catch my breath because it was an atmosphere that was so rich with intention, with concentration, with kind of all of the vision, the divine vision and the confluences of all of these individuals, this incredible unity experience in there, of all the people who must have transitioned through there and gone and meditated, even for a few minutes. It felt like I was struck by all of that in one go. It was like walking into a solidified space of unity consciousness. Everything that I'd thought of, but hadn't experienced and couldn't in an embodied, physical, architecturally based place. And so I took my breath and I sat outside for a while, and when I felt ready, I went in and was just so enchanted with the place. And I go there regularly, every visit that I've done since then. And I'd like to go every day to Matra Mandir and to spend time there. Because when I'm there, I get a kind of download. It's an incredibly creative place for me. It's like being in touch, just like the light that comes from the top. I wrote my whole novel in Oroville. Virtually, I went and meditated there every day, and it was like taking a download. And you know, they say, it was like, a friend of mine says, it's like being a secretary for your imagination. It was just that sort of channeling feeling that was very easy and blissful and enchanting, and you could ask questions, they'd be answered. Everything fell into place in a beautiful kind of confluence, and I had an incredible time there. And while I was in Oroville in 2017, one of my students from the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation from the first year cohort that had joined in 2014 came, and he said, I have never been to a place that I've been so happy. And he said, I would love to bring all of our students here.
Oh.
And I said, oof, that's a big ask, but it's an important question to raise. Well, how do I do this? I'd love to bring students here because I was enjoying the bliss and the inspiration myself. And I knew that I had taken many ideas from Oroville about the curriculum for being and embedded them in this curriculum. And I knew that it was important to connect the students to the place. So this program I run, the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, otherwise known as BCII, is a total experiment in the future of learning. It's at the bleeding edge of learning around how we do this learning for being. How do we create these extraordinary people and create the enabling conditions for transformation in the world by transforming these individuals who are doing the program? What better remit than to bring these students to Oroville So an experimental degree, taking students from an experimental degree and putting them within an experimental community that has created a vision for that ultimate question of philosophy, how then shall we live? So this was an extraordinary experience the first time I brought students over. The student who came and suggested that we take our cohort, first ever cohort in 2017 over, was, his family had also been inspired by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So he co-designed the studio with me, co-designed the assessments, and I just thought, I'll give it a crack. Anything could go wrong, but let's just do it. And
What was the average age
around
of the student?
21 years of age.
I see.
So it was the fourth year subject, and I selected students specially for it. So they had to, it wasn't anyone can do this, it was for the right people. But I had a really strong sense that having even a small number, 20, 21 students, I don't want to overwhelm Oroville by bringing too many, but having a small enough but impactful enough people who are having that experience of transformative learning and understanding the spirit of Oroville was so important for me, to have that understanding. It's very, very different from a Western experience. Australians are quite good at pioneering. There's a few very pioneering Australians in Oroville that we all know. But how would that look? It was my big experiment. And it was something that completely blew me away from the first go, how you could almost see the transformation in action. I always describe it like popcorn. You could see it like popcorn. It had a contagion to it. There's something in the place, the enabling conditions of the place that allows for the inner transformation to happen. And you could see people getting it like popcorn and popping, bursting open. And one of the things about transformative learning that we know is once people have had that experience, once they've been expanded, you can't shrink them again. So bringing these students, they then had an impact in the cohort, really positive impact, because it's contagious. It's not something that sits within a box. It's an atmosphere, it's an intention, you could use words that are much more familiar in the academy, like collaboration, like, radical collaboration. It was that feeling of radical collaboration which the world needs. It was the ability to think really differently. It was about futures thinking, about complex problem solving. I was really impacted by the idea that the mother had that all the problems of the world were in India too. In our degree, we focus on complex problem solving, creative and critical thinking, and we use all of the disciplinary creative methods to look at complex challenges of our times. So how do we go beyond the mental as well was very important. How do we do that embodied learning where you actually come to a place, you feel physically different? The students went and did the awareness through the body training, the ATB training in Oroville. They had experiences, all of them, in Matramandir and in the gardens. They all had experiences in every activity that is offered in Oroville because it's so integrated. Whether it's sound, whether it's food, whether it's the body, how do we integrate all of this into a curriculum that helps people understand what's possible? Because I'm really interested in what's possible, not in what is currently being played out. So I'm really interested in business as unusual, learning as unusual, and learning for transformation. So that was how I came to Oroville, how I brought students to Oroville. And since then, I've managed to be awarded a lot of money from the Australian New Colombo Plan Fund, which interestingly enough was started by my husband's grandfather. And this is a fund that gives students money to experience Asia, because Australia is sitting in the Asian continent, but with this umbilicus to England. Yet there is an intention to engage more fully with Asian continent and with Asian ideas and the non-Western ways of knowing. So I've set up a whole subject called New Knowledge Making Lab that experiments with new ways of knowing, non-Western ways of knowing, non-traditional ways of knowing, ways that might privilege known unknowns, what we know but we don't know, tacit knowledge, intuitive knowledge, all of those things that aren't privileged in the academy, which seems to privilege just this scientific Newtonian way of knowing, that Cartesian separation. I was always about unity and transformation as my middle name, as my remit, and this whole idea of unity. So I was always about breaking down that great separation and helping students to feel collectively that feeling of unity consciousness as well as inner. And that always manifests as a commitment to transformative agenda in the world. And one of the amazing things about this program, why it's won so many international and national awards now, is that it has extraordinary success with students and what they achieve at the end of it, and the partners that we've attracted. So lots of interest from a whole innovation ecosystem. We have 800 industry partners who are interested in participating with our students with this curriculum in Australia. And they go from all the big 4 or 5 consultancies, Accenture, PwC, Deloitte, right through to big organizations that do engineering like Arup or Oricon, right through to, banks, multinationals, to innovation consultancies, startups, community groups, and loads of social impact organizations. So, for example, on this trip, my friend and colleague Manisha Amin came from the Center for Inclusive Design to be with our students and to explore more about Oroville and understand how that inclusive design fits into the Unity project here in Oroville. And the connections were just so beautiful. The work of inclusion and diversity, which so many of our organizations are involved in, the bigger picture, the unity picture, it is so relevant. Oroville has so much to offer the world in terms of its visionary thinking, in terms of that unity, that lived human unity piece.
How much of the mother's works have you read?
So this is an interesting question because I told you about the library of my mother's, Sri Aurobindo's books. She didn't have any books of the mother. But one thing that when I came to Oroville that first time in 1989, it was the mother's vision that really enchanted me. And maybe because I'm a woman, I was interested and always have been in notions of the divine feminine. Mm-hmm. And I've researched that, and I'm really interested in understanding more of it. And one of the things that I love about Oroville from my early 20s onwards is that there wasn't just a man at the head of this amazing vision. It was so balanced. There was female energy as well as male energy. I was absolutely beyond grateful for that, because I knew intuitively that you can't have one without the other. And there was such a beautiful balance in Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So yes, the mother was the one who touched my heart. I came back from Oroville with a whole library to add alongside my grandmother's library of the mother's books. So I brought every single one I could buy, packed my bag filled.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that part of it was really extraordinary for me. And the other thing that I really related to with the mother was her deep intuition, because I'd already experienced this myself, the deep knowing, that the way that really touches you, moves you, and helps connect you to others. So that was how I connected with her. And I'm sure that everyone has experiences of having had that kind of direct voice even when they're in Oroville. So I always had that. And so that was a very special experience for me in coming to Oroville. And so, I was really connected with her work and her mission.
Could you speak a little bit about your connection with Astaire?
Sure. So I'm a storyteller, I'm a novelist, and Asta has some extremely interesting stories. And so my connection with Asta was essentially I have a beautiful aunt, Uma Prakash in Delhi, Fanti I call her, and grew up in Calcutta with my mother as her mentor. And she married Ravin Prakash, and Ravin is Asta's first cousin. And so I was sent to Asta through my family connection to understand what Oroville was. And she gave me the best introduction. I loved her introductions always. And when I wrote to her years later and said, Asta, I want to come back and spend a longer time now in Oroville. And she said, my dear, your timing is perfect. It was just extraordinary. So my big question that I asked to her back then is, what does Oroville have to teach the world? And she said, as usual, Asta, my dear, that is for you to answer. And I've spent quite a lot of that time with that question. And I've done some research papers, a couple of papers now on Oroville, because, you know, as an academic, you have a research agenda and you have a teaching agenda. How beautiful is it that the mother foresaw this with the Charter of Oroville, making it the perfect place to kind of come and be in a university. I mean, university in the biggest sense, I might say, combining unity with diversity, which is what my practice is with transdisciplinary learning and creativity and this whole curriculum for being. And so, yeah, coming here, asking that question, you know, what does Oroville have to give the world, seeing that in the Charter, unended learning. Well, I'm now on a committee. I'm the creative director at my university for postgraduate futures. Universities around the world are only just switching on to this now, and they call it lifelong learning. How do we think of learning beyond a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and so-called terminal degree, the PhD? How do we learn throughout a lifetime? That's becoming the new remit. Well, this is original thinking in the Oroville Charter, so it's all there, as well as the idea of research in the Oroville Charter. It's actually the perfect university agenda in that one charter. And so the university, allows us all as researchers to research whatever we want. And there's something really beautiful in that. Why would you research anything that wasn't cosmically, spiritually integral to who you are and what contribution you could make to the world? So I've done a couple of pieces, one on transformative learning with people in Oroville, including Surya Mai and a colleague of mine who did her PhD on transformative learning, who came with a previous global studio I brought in 2020, Katie Ross. And I've done another piece on resilience in Oroville, and that nothing could be of more relevance now than resilience in Oroville. Oroville has a spirit of resilience that
absolutely
it will thrive, and it will be very good in the long run for Oroville to maintain that. So I've done that research, but I also have a very, the inner research agenda is very important to me too, and that's always present in everything I do here, and it's a very conscious research.
Are you going
process.
to live here one day?
I'd love to. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. But my work is very important right now for the rest of the world, because there is so much that the Oroville can teach the world, as I said earlier. So yes, there is that.
You see, these big companies now are sending their people to meditate.
Of course they are. Yeah. It's like it's going. Just come into fashion.
It's opening up.
The world is opening up. It's opening up. It's such a good time to have this agenda that Oroville has. So much to give the world. So much. In fact, the minute I get back to Sydney, I'm writing up a proposal with my colleague Manisha, who is here with me, and with some Aurovilians to do a presentation at one of the big conferences that we're hosting at our university. There's a couple. There's one called the Transformations Conference, which is a kind of research community involved with transitions and like energy transitions, transformation around the world, with a deeply transformative agenda and manifesto to make that happen, as well as creative conferences that are happening there. So bringing Auroville to the world, sharing what's here by coming and going and sharing deeply is my agenda. Yeah.
I'd like you to mention some of the people that you've met over the years and become close to in Auroville.
That's touched me so deeply, because I have met so many people there, and I feel like I'm doing homage to all of them now to mention their names, because they're great soulful influences, and I take them with me, I take their energy with me. And one of the beautiful things about coming back to Auroville is I feel so welcomed by each of these people and so connected. So one of the things about community for me is it has the word unity in the middle. Like communication has the word unity embedded in it. And these are my practices, and I have so many friends and people that I've learned from and been blessed by, I guess you could say, and have darshan of even, because, the idea of darshan is two-way. You see, it's not just seeing, but being blessed by what you see. So I'm blessed by seeing the people I see in Auroville, and I count many people there from so I love people like Asta. I have a huge amount of respect for her. I love my friend Suryamai, who is an Aurovillian, and she's helped us out a lot with our global studio, and she connects beautifully with our students, runs programs for them, and I've written and I've run workshops with her, and she ran the Bridge Conference with Aditi that I was invited to speak at in the 50th anniversary. And I'm so grateful for that conference, because we met people from all over the world who came here, and the bridge, you had this sense of a bridge evolving. Beautiful concept, actually, that needs to grow. So those people, I love Aurelio. I so value the work he's doing with sound and consciousness.
Yes.
And every single one of our students has got that in an experiential, embodied way. To be taken on a journey through sound. Not many people have this notion of the impact of sound. They're impacted by it the whole time. We're impacted by our environment the whole time. And yet we're not physical environment, and yet we don't think about how to create it. We don't think so much about the sound and the influences, but simple practices that they've taught our students, and the lovely energy that I get from all of my friends in Auroville is just glorious. And I can't even begin to mention all of them, but I absolutely enjoy so many people deep in the students, in the youth center. I've known him since he was working at Bharat Nivas, assisting Asta, and I always take students there, and the welcome they get is extraordinary. And every single person whose face I know, from, Andre, what a gift.
Yes.
What a talent. I feel like so blessed to see him every time I see him. Healers, magicians, intent sadhaks and practitioners, and people who understand the power of consciousness, the power of the experiment of Auroville, and people who are very good at connecting with people in a non-transactional way. That's what I love about Auroville.
I want to ask you if you or any of your students have been working on the transformation of the body.
Yes, I have been personally. And whether they have or not, it's not something that I ask. One of these things we know about transformative learning is that you can't say you will be transformed. You can't dictate it.
No.
You create the enabling conditions. And it's also something that's very hard to measure, right? It's very interesting. I'm in an institution that likes to measure everything. They like to value what they measure and then measure what they value, which makes it a bit of a closed loop. And so something like transformation, I prefer to report on it through narrative, through the stories I tell, the novels I write, and the people I meet and the stories I tell them. It's very hard to actually say, this is happening, and this is happening at level A, B, C, or D, 70% or 100%. For me, it's not like that. It's far more cosmic than something that is so banal it can be measured in a way that is ordinary. So transformation of the body, it's an experiential thing, and it's something that you can report to yourself. Do you talk about it? Me personally, not necessarily, because, I was meditating in the humility petal this morning. Do you tell people, hey, I'm transformed? I don't think that's what it's about for me.
No, not
Certainly
at all.
it wouldn't work as a teacher. As a teacher, you're trying to unveil that for other people. You're trying to, the traditional idea of a guru or teacher here is to a remover of the veil, a remover of darkness. So essentially, if everybody's, if they are complete human beings, they just need the veils kind of removed for themselves. I think people do it in different ways. I've done it through a lifelong meditation practice. What's really interesting about Oroville is that it explores so many different ways to do this transformative learning about yourself. One thing I know that the students have been doing non-stop, and they all report a transformation, and I can go by nothing more than a report of it. I can't measure it, don't forget.
Yeah.
But one of the articles I did write with a series of Orovillians is an indication. We found some indicators of transformation. And we used the literature that goes right back to Maslow's theory of transformation. And, so Maslow, do you remember Maslow's hierarchy? He had, evolution of people, essentially, but I don't like to use the word stages, but he did sort of divide the world up into people who have peak experiences and people who didn't. So interestingly enough, peakers and non-peakers. I'm really interested in what we can learn from the peakers to share that with the non-peakers. And so one of the things we did was we collected data from the students' assessment that were around the indicators of peak experience. And we wrote an article on how these markers are displayed. I guess as a way of measuring through assignment, through story. And they were all, the markers are things like the noetic. What is it that an experience like this of transformation, that you know something in a deep way that you didn't know previously? How is that reported in the assignments? Experience of fulfillment, that's often there. Spirituality, those are some of the markers of peak experiences. And even markers like transience. Transience is this, it goes back to the sort of biblical idea, transformation doesn't always happen and in a sustained way. Like when the Jews went up to the Mount Sinai, they came back with the tablets and then they went back to their old ways. So the hilltop moment was kind of followed by an integration. And so I'm interested in how students integrate what they do in Oroville, what they learn in Oroville. So it is a bit of a hilltop high. It's a hilltop high moment, right? So how do you integrate it afterwards? I've had students say to me, I want the dirt from Oroville to remain with me as long as it can. Kind of like, that whole idea, I don't want to ever wash my clothes again. It's a kind of beautiful kind of expression of that marker I was talking about of transience. How do How do you capture the transience and how do you make it permanent? How do you make this state permanent? We have conversations like that. And also like the action. How do you take action back? We have a whole group of beautiful values around the Matramanda. So those divine values, if you like, from receptivity. I was in the receptivity petal today as well, and followed by progress. And I went to generosity the day before. And how do we take these values back into our lives, which where other constraints, other distractions, where the spiritual agenda is not as strong and not present at all. We don't have any agenda like that in education over there. It's all got to be, this very secular, anemic version where you don't teach the whole being. And that's how it happens, and that's called education. So how do you bring that back? I do a lot of work around the values too. How do you get students to create their own value list? They've seen what the mother's values were. You can't tell everyone, now you have to be like that. Create your own. These are very creative students. And then live by them and tell me how you're going to live by them. Tell me how you're going to enact them. Tell yourself how you're going to do that work. We have beautiful assessments in the Oracle Global Studio. I've been to some assessments here. People show PowerPoint presentations at the end of an internship experience. Nothing like that with our global studio. The focus is on transformation that is articulated from the get-go. So all of the assessments are about reporting on that, which makes them much more interesting to mark, actually, than just these very external kind of references to what you did or whatever. So the assessments, the first one is based on song lines. Indigenous cultures in Australia have song lines where they tell the story of place in relation to relativity and connectivity and unity of all. So how do stories connect that connective tissue? I get them to do a piece on their discovery piece when they're just immersing in Oroville. Tell us how you connect with the place and what the stories are that you've created. The next part of that assessment one, the 1B, that's 1A, the song lines. 1B is an integral journey through Oroville. So using the philosophy of integral yoga, and all life is yoga, tell me your inner experience of Oroville. You might want to use the different levels of being as your sort of structure. But the idea is to check in with the personal in relation to place. So I've had the most extraordinary range of responses to this, from poetry to whole books that people have created, to entries that have been interesting and absolutely indicating transformation, which was your question, that have started off as a third person, saying, here was the person I was, and then someone's mother calls as part of the reporting, she cries and she can't be herself anymore, and then the narrative takes over in first person. And so you have a third person narrative next to a first person narrative telling the story of that change, the person I was, that person, she over there, versus what's happening for me now. So I've had such extraordinary responses to that. One student even gave me a sound graph because he said it was so personal he couldn't actually give it to me, but he recorded it all. He went to work with Aurelio in Swaram, and he worked on creating a sound journey, and he created this. He gave me all of these sound waves, if you like, in a diagrammatic form as his assessment, and then wrote a piece with that about all of the things that and that were so deep that he couldn't articulate all of them, but he was giving me the tip of the iceberg. So that's what I mean by impact of place. And then the second assessment, the sort of the larger one, if you like, is a project that is self-designed. So I don't do the work for them. It's a creative residency. It's a research project, or it's an internship-like experience where they immerse themselves in experience. So For example, 4 students are in with the incredible Kathy. Now, she's a character of all the characters that I love in Oroville.
Who is this?
Kathy, who runs EcoFem. Extraordinary. 4 of them are doing an internship with her while they're here. Johnny at Fertile.
Yes.
Such a character. Joss, my goodness.
Joss,
if I'm
yes.
allowed to mention some more Aurovilians who completely move me, extraordinary. And I've mentioned 3 Aussies there, I know, in one breath. Really astounding to see pioneer Australians being pioneers here. So yes, so they do an internship-like experience, or they do a creative residency, or they do this research project. So, for example, in creative residencies, people have done a sound bath, inspired by Aurelia, of course. But I had one student doing the most extraordinary. He was an IT student. Extraordinary collection of sounds that he collected through Oroville, from the tinkling of cowbells through the mother's voice in some of her recordings, right through to the sounds that the students were making, and playing them over us while we all lay down on a beach. My mother has renovated a guest house called the Rainbow Guest House. We went there for our final party in the last Oroville Global Studio, and we all lay down on the sand and had this played over us, and we're looking up at the stars. Bliss, total bliss, and what a high! That was such a high. I've had amazing assessments that are so indicative of transformation. For example, like one student did a series of postcards to the mother, just that she hand illustrated from connecting to her so deeply, saying, I wonder what you will think of me. I'm here on my first week, and on my second week I'm like this, and here's how I'm relating as someone experiencing you for the first time, after you've gone but still present. So touching. And kind of assignments where, I can't even think, whole films that have been extraordinary. I'll share them with you. They're very special. Yeah.
Bim, thank you so much.